Okay, everyone. So this week's portion is Va'eyra, and in it is the story of the plagues, the Makkos. Great story. We love reading it, but we need to understand what is the function of the Makkos, of the plagues. What was it for? It's not a great sound and light show. That's not the purpose, and therefore we're a little bit, wondering what exactly is the reason for the plagues? Because if the goal is to get the Jews out of Egypt, so God doesn't need to bring plagues on them. They could just put in their hearts to set us free. So the Makkos, the plagues, are to show something else. We're going to see this more next week. We will bring the Zohar next week. But for this week, I want us to understand one thing. There is a very basic fundamental idea the plagues are accomplishing, and this is brought by Nachmanides, and it's a fundamental concept. Nachmanides talks about there were different ideas in the world that came up about God or not God, or God's relationship to us. There were those that said, well, there is no God. Okay, no God, no creator of the world. There are those that said, okay, there is a God, but he can't know everything. He can't do everything. He's not omniscient. He's not omnipotent. And there are those that said, yeah, no, there is a God and he's omnipotent, but he doesn't care anymore. He's not involved in the world. He's too lofty to care about your little details of your life. Comes along the story of the Exodus of Egypt. And what happens is the entire world sees that that is not the case. There is a God who is involved in the world, and he has what's called mashgiach. He oversees. He's involved in our complete existence and what's going on in our lives. I remember years ago when I was a young rabbinic student, I had heard of the great Rav Ovadia Yosef talking about the Makkos, the plagues, and he said something very simple, but it stuck with me for years. He said that he imagined, the plague of the Orav, the mixed animals, the wild animals coming, and he's describing how the lions, tigers, and bears, oh my, they're running down, and they see the Jews and Egyptians right next to them. And what happens is that the lion eats the Egyptian, eats another Egyptian, looks at the Jew and walks away. And he was talking about how if you were there, you experienced that, and you would see how the lion and the tigers, they knew the difference between the Jew and the Egyptian, how that would be transformative, because you'd realize how omniscient and omnipotent and all-powerful God is. He puts in the minds of the animals to go and to distinguish such things. Okay? You have the other plagues, where now it shows that God's involved in our world. Okay, the plagues, all of a sudden, God cares about the fact that there is a nation that's being subjugated, and he comes to save them with these miracles. So he knows everything, he's omnipotent, and he is involved in the world. And then you see the plagues of Barad, of hail, where fire and ice are connected. Two opposites are brought together, and you realize that there must be a creator above and beyond. Okay, the plague of the firstborn, there's one source above everything. And so the Makkos, the plagues, are to go and to teach us the lesson that there is a creator, he is omnipotent, and he's involved in our lives. And until that point in the world, that wasn't so clear for many people. The world had gone on astray in its different ideas, and this is God's calling card. He's showing, yes, this is the reality. And what happens is, we have to understand, that means that we tell the story of the Exodus of Egypt throughout the years because that was a moment in time where God revealed himself clearly. This is the way the world is. And we pass this down as a statement of what we experienced. And that's why so many of the commandments, it says, are Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim, are remembrances of coming out of Egypt, because that was a fundamental moment. It was an epiphany, a realization of the way the world really is, where God made it abundantly clear and revealed miracles that you couldn't deny. And so we're commanded every year. It always fascinates me, no matter how distant a Jewish person might be from his heritage, they all want to get to a Seder. They want to have the experience of telling of the story of the coming out of Egypt. And it's amazing. It's fascinating. Just think about it. This happened, and we were commanded to tell it over, and everyone wants to hear it no matter what, for thousands of years. So this is a fundamental aspect of what the plagues were supposed to teach us, understanding God's involvement, His omnipotence, His creation of the world, and that's the goal. All right, fantastic. And that's a very famous discussion of Nachmanides and how this works. But I have a very simple problem with this. You see, the goal now, as we said, is to reveal God in the world, to show His calling card, and that everyone, Jews, Egyptians, the whole world, would realize there is a master of the world, and they'll still see it clearly. Now, if that is the goal, we have a problem. Because what happens is that when Moshe first comes to Paro and says to let the Jews go, he is supposed to show Paro a sign. The sign is that they throw down the staff, and the staff turns into a snake. Okay, that is a great trick. That is unbelievable. You must see that there's a God, right? The only problem is, the text says that Paro calls his magicians and says, hey guys, do the same thing. Now, that's what it says in the text. The Midrash tells us even further. It says that Paro calls his wife and says, honey, do the snake trick. She throws down her staff, turns into a snake. And then they go and they call the kids out of school. Oh, little kids, come on out. Come, do the snake trick. And they throw down their stick and they turn it into a snake. Apparently, this was something the Egyptians could do. They were involved in the occult, whatever the illusions were. But this was some kind of a trick that the Egyptians knew how to do, even the little kids. So what happens? It says there that the snake turned back into a staff, and as a staff, it ate the other staffs. Okay? That is a great trick. But if you were an Egyptian and you were seeing that, while knowing that everyone knows the snake trick, you would say, wow, that's pretty good. Moshe's a better magician than we are. We know how to do level A of the trick, and he's doing level B of the trick. And that's a problem, because if the goal is to show the things that we've talked about, God's calling card, why would you send a sign that the Egyptians themselves could do? And that's not only in the first sign, it's in the first two plagues. The plague afterwards of turning the water into blood. It says the Egyptians could do that too. Now, granted, there's a difference between their blood and our blood, and that's what the text says by when Moshe and Aaron turned the water into blood, it says that all the fish died. To show that when the Egyptians turn their water into blood, it's really red water. It doesn't have the chemical properties of blood. And that's why in the first plague, when it happens, the fish die, because they're not swimming in red water, they're swimming in actual blood. So, great. So now you could see that, wow, so what? Does that mean that's God? Well, we could kind of do the same thing. He's a better magician, maybe. That's the first plague. Second plague is the frogs. So the frogs that come out of the ore, come out of the waters, and there's tons of frogs. Fantastic. Great, amazing thing. The Egyptians could do it too. Now, again, there's a difference. It says afterwards, Paro said, all right, get rid of the frogs and put them, in the water. What was Paro trying to do? What was Pharaoh trying to do? He was trying to test Moshe. Because The way the Egyptians created the frogs was through witchcraft. Black magic, let's call it. The koach of the tzaratuma, the system of impurity. And the rule of how that system works is it can survive in what's called a mikvah, a purifying natural body of water. So whatever they were doing in this occult black magic side of impurity, that couldn't last in the waters. And that's why it says that when Moshe, prays to get rid of the frogs, they only go back in the water. So Pharaoh could see, wait a minute, Moshe's not using the same system that we're using, because we're using the kohatuma, the side of impurity, and he must not be, because his frogs are able to go back into the water and stay there. They must not just be from this other system. But still, I mean, this is what God is showing. He can do something the magicians can't do at all. Give me the big guns. Show me something that they can ever dream of, and they'll see, wow, it's amazing. It's only until the third plague, the plague of Kinim, the lice. It's the same system. Since they're coming from the Egyptians, witchcraft, their kohatuma, the black magic, is coming from the side of impurity. There's a rule that if a person comes in contact with a bone of a dead person, if it's so small than a barley corn, then it won't transfer impurity. And this is the system that of impurity does not go and somehow work. I don't know how it does. I never did it. I don't know how it works. But they can't go and make it affect where there's no transfer of impurity. And therefore something smaller than a barley corn is not subject to these system of impurity. And that's why the Egyptians say we can't, the Pharaoh's magicians said we can't do it. And they say, Etz Belukim. It's the finger of God. And that's the beginning of their revelation. But again, if the whole point is to show God's calling card, why mess around with stuff that they could do themselves? Show them something that they're going to say, oh, wow, you're right. This must be God. And the first sign is not that, and the first plague and the second plague are not that either. Then it gets ramped up, I understand. But why? So we need to understand this concept. Now, to understand this, we need to discuss the concept of nature. Okay? Now, most people in the world think that nature is something that just goes, and it's the natural world. And very often, even people will say, with God's help, they don't really believe that. Very often they think that, I'm in control of this natural world. This is the way the thing works. And as long as God doesn't get in my way, I'll be all right. And the reason for that is there is a great misunderstanding in the essential nature of nature. Let's try to understand this. So, if I give you an example, I say, was the splitting of the Red Sea a great miracle? So most people would say, yeah, it's a tremendous miracle. Wow, it's amazing. Okay, I grant that. Now, what would happen if the Red Sea would split every 70 years? Would you call it a miracle? No. You would call it what? A phenomenon. That's what it would be. And as a matter of fact, you would plan it out, you would get your lawn chair, you come sit by the Red Sea with your binoculars, and CNN's going to televise it. Once every 70 years, the Red Sea splits. It's a phenomenon. But nobody's going to think it's a miracle, because it happens once every 70 years. Okay. Now, what happened if the Red Sea split every day? Would you call it a miracle? No. Would you call it phenomenon? No. What would you call it? You call it nature. That's it. As a matter of fact, it's an amazing thing. The sages tell us that it wasn't only the Red Sea that split at that moment, it was actually all bodies of water divided. So imagine that you lived in a world where at 12 o'clock every day, water is just kind of separated. How long would it take you to get used to that and not blink an eye? A day? 2 days? A week? You'd be so used to it. Imagine you go to the beach and you go to the pool and it's 5 to 12 and the lifeguard would blow his whistle. Okay, shoot, everyone out of the water. 5 to 12, water's about to split. And you wouldn't even think about it because you would be used to it. That's the way the world works. Now, what now is the essential difference between the miracle and nature? Only one difference. It's the frequency of which it happens. But there, by definition, there's no essential difference. And this is a mistake that people don't realize. Science does not explain to us why something is the way it is. It's outside the purview of science. Science explains how it works. So if the Red Sea or all bodies of water split every day, then what would happen is you would be able to see that there's a law of nature that was happening that caused the Red Sea to split. And you would define it. Why it should be that way, that's not what you're discussing. You would just be looking and saying, okay, this is how it works. We understand on a chemical level, we understand on whatever the level it is that you understand. You would search and say, that's how it happens. But not why it happens. That's outside the purview of science. And therefore, the deeper meaning of nature and miracles is that nature is God's will on a consistent basis. And this is a problem when people have very sort of childish ideas of spirituality and sort of think, that somehow the way the miracles happen is that, God stuck his hand out and split the Red Sea, and they get these comic book images. But God knows science really well. He created it. So how he runs the world, if you're going to study and you're going to search for if it's happening on a consistent basis, you'll find the law of how he's doing it, what he's doing. The nature is God's will, how the universe should work, and therefore it'll have laws on a consistent basis. Miracles are God's will, how the world should work on a once in history basis. But there's no essential other difference to it. And that's why the word for nature is a very, very amazing word. The word is called teva. Ha-teva, nature, all the nature. Teva has a dual meaning to it. Teva is from the word litboa. Litboa means to drown. What is that? Well, it's very simple. Because when you look at the world, you could go and drown in nature. You could not see any godliness in this. You could say, this is Mother Nature. I don't know whose mother's named Nature, not mine. Maybe yours is, I don't know. What does it mean, Mother Nature? What does that mean? I don't know what it means. Everyone says it. What does it mean? So you drown in nature. It's just, that's the way it is. I understand that. That's the way it is. But who made that? So the danger of nature is, since it's happening on a consistent basis, you can miss out on the godliness of that's the way the world works. So, the sun rises every day. Yeah, just the way it is. You put a seed in the ground. You put a seed in the ground, what happens is there's actually a decaying process that happens before the seed starts to sprout out. You put a seed in the ground, it starts decaying and sprouts out, and you have a plant. And you say, okay, yeah, that makes sense the way it is. Now, if a person would die and they would put it into the ground, and then one day you were walking by a cemetery, and the guy was put into the cemetery starts to come out. You go, it's crazy. You would scream. It's a miracle. Well, okay, but the only difference is that this happens, you've never seen it before, and this you see all the time. And therefore, you are unfazed by the beauty and the grandeur of a plant growing, because we are drowning in nature. But that's not the way the world's supposed to be. You see, there's different names of God, and they all refer to different ways that God manifests and relates to us in the world. Because in essence, it's a great mistake. You can never understand God in his essence. It says in the Zohar, in the seminal work of Kabbalah, it says, Leis machshavet tfisei beklal. No mind can have any concept of God. God in his essence. We don't talk about it. We call that Ein Sof. We have no concept. What we understand is the way God chose to relate to us. The different names of God are the ways that he is relating to us, the way he's manifest in the world. Now, there's a name there that is referred to in the Torah called Elokim. The name Elokim of God is, when you say that, you're supposed to think to yourself, Elokim is Bala Kochos Kulam, the master of all of the powers. That is the name Elokim, master of all the powers. Okay, now, the name Elokim, it's a fascinating thing. The master of all powers, if you take the numerical value, the gematria of the name Elokim, every letter in Hebrew has a numerical value. Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, Gimel is 3. Take the numerical value, add it up, the Aleph and the Lam and the Hey and the Yud and the Mem, comes up to 86. Now, if you take the numerical value, the gematria, of the word Hateva, all of nature, can you guess what it equals? It's also 86. Why is it 86? Because when you see nature, the idea is to be able to say, what is the source of this? And that is Elokim. That is the master of all powers. That is God revealing himself through nature. And that's even why you take the name Elokim. If you flip around the letters, it spells the word Mi-Ele, which means who made this? Who this? When you go out in the world, instead of drowning in nature and saying, oh, this is just the way the world is, there's no spirituality, there's no God, this is just the way it is. Instead of drowning in that, what we should do is to say, Mi-Ele, who is the source of this? Mi-Ele Elokim, the same numerical value of nature is the name of God that controls nature, Elokim. And that's also why the word for nature, Teva, can also be the word a matbeya, which is a stamp, coin, something that's been imprinted. Because nature has the imprint of God's will. And it's a very deep and important concept. It's very, very central. Because it's the difference between a spiritual person and a non-spiritual person. A spiritual person is going to look at the world and see godliness in it. And a person who doesn't sees it just as that's the way it is. It's just I'm drowning in this way the world is and not seeing it. This is a very, very fundamental idea to understand of how God relates to us. Now, with that idea, we could explain what is the possible understanding of why the first few plagues were ones that the Egyptians could do themselves. You see, if God would have given plagues that were completely beyond anything that the Egyptians could imagine that they control, they would have said the following. They would have said, you know what? We have our area of control, our area of our technology. The technology was occult. Our area we control, and God does his things. But this area of our technology is within our realm. It's not God. He has his things. But this we control. So what happened instead? By the fact that God created the first signs and plagues on things the Egyptians could do, where they thought it was their own control. And then at a certain point, they realized, no, these things are outside of our realm. It retroactively made them understand, potentially understand at least, the things they thought were in their control are not. They are, in the sense you could do certain things. I mean, you could plant a seed in the ground, it's going to grow. But it's not because that's your realm. It's because that is the will of the way the world is, that God wants the world to run. And if he doesn't want to run that way, we'll run that way. It's just his constant will. So the first few plagues and the first sign are essential for the deeper meaning of the way the world works. You know, we here, we don't have the Egyptian occult thing, but we have our own system like that. It's called our technology. And very often people will think, okay, we have our area and God's out there and he has his area. And once we figure this out, then we'll control our own destiny. And again, I want to explain nothing wrong with going and trying to find, you're supposed to try to find cures for diseases and use your technology. The problem is that once you believe that that is your realm and it is not the system that God wills in the world and allows you to use that system, you've cut yourself off from the source of all existence. And that is the deeper meaning of why the plagues start out this way. Retroactively, the Egyptians, the Jews, everyone should look back and say, even the things that are nature, even the things that are the natural world that we just think that's the way they are, even the areas that we think we control because we're functioning within those laws, are only those laws because that is the constant will that God wants. And that's why a spiritual person tries to see beyond that. And there's different levels to this thing. I mean, there are people, I said, who really, don't completely only believe in nature, and there are people who say they believe in God but believe in really that this is my area. And then there have been in history some great people who were able to see through the veil of nature and see it as that. There's a wild story in the Talmud of a rabbi, Chanina ben Dosa, who was a very, very holy man. He was very poor, and one day it was before Shabbat, and his daughter came to him and said, "We have no oil to light for the Shabbat candles." So he said, "Well, what do we have?" She said, "We have vinegar." So he said, "Okay, light the vinegar. The one who said the oil should light will say the vinegar could light." She lit the vinegar and it lit. Now, of course, God doesn't do that for most people. Why? Because for most of us, that's the challenge of life. The challenge of life is to go and to see God in the sunrise, in the sunset, in the flowers that are blooming. That's the challenge. We all have it. It's natural. You built something. It's you. You don't see that. I planted this. I did this, and you lose your connection to the source. Somebody like Rav Chanina ben Dosa, who was on the level that he already had passed that. He was already seeing God in everything. So for him, God makes the world function that way. For the rest of us, it doesn't work like that. And that really is the Nachmanides' conclusion about this piece. He says that the calling card of God, which was the miracles, the plagues, and the exodus of Egypt, was for God to show himself. And once we knew that was the reality, it gives us the ability to see God in what's called the hidden miracles. The hidden miracles are the miracles of your daily life. They're nature. They are why things work out, why you met this person, why you met that person, how the things go. That is now the deeper sense of what a person has to accomplish in life. To see God in his life in every single thing. Not just the miracles, the nature, and every part of our existence. Have a great Shabbat. Take care.